Today I'm going to show you how to take something that looks like this and transform it into a beautiful loaf of bread, like this and like this. Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about bread. So I just started doing this a few months ago. Matt used to make sourdough bread a couple years ago. It's kind of his thing, his baby. I didn't touch it. He made good bread. And then he stopped, and I was sad because it was really good bread. He used to use all sprouted grains and whole grains, so it was a much denser loaf. And I decided I wanted to take it over. We had a dormant starter sitting in our fridge, and I said, we should start making bread once a week again. And it's become my obsession. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about starters. I reanimated my dried starter according to Breadtopia's instructions because that's where it was from. But Patrick Ryan on I Love Cooking Ireland has a really great tutorial on how to make a sourdough starter out of literally nothing, out of just flour and water. It takes a little bit longer, but who cares? So this is my starter. Her name is Helga. I think it's really important to name your starter because it's like your pet and you have to take care of it and you have to feed it once a week and put it in the fridge and make sure everything's fine. And you know, like I needed one more thing to take care of because 3 kids wasn't enough. So I just took Helga out of the fridge. She's been in there 5 or 6 days and I'm gonna cheat a little bit. You should feed your starter the same amount in weight of flour and water that it weighs. So what I could do is this. I have the same container as this, basically, and I have my scale. And I can tear my scale or zero it with this. And I'm gonna do it in grams because pretty much all bread is by weight and it's usually by grams. And then I weigh my starter, 781 grams. That's a lot of starter. If I tried to put all of that into this, it would just flow all over it. And as you can see, that happened to me last time. So I have 2 options here. I can remove a bunch of the starter because you have to feed it before you stick it in the fridge. So I can either remove a bunch of it or I can cheat and just feed it enough that it'll grow. It's probably still gonna overflow, but I don't really care. It'll be fine. So this is how I do it, completely by what looks right. I think the more you do this, the more you get a feel for the consistency of it. If it's too watery, you're not gonna get a lot of rise out of it. You're not gonna get the bubbles. If it's too dry, you're gonna end up with a lot of lumps. So I'm not really worried about that. This is just water that's tepid. So it's like room temperature. It was left over from my kettle for making coffee this morning. So I'm just gonna do this. This is my Danish whisk. And you don't need a Danish whisk. You can do this with a fork or really anything you have. Just gonna add enough water so it looks like the consistency is right. It should be like a thick pancake batter. And you wanna get down into your starter. You don't wanna just be mixing the top and then you're not giving your bacteria in the bottom anything to eat. You're trying to feed your starter. You're trying to get all of this lovely bit down here to get a lot of food. This is kind of a sticky, messy job, but I feel like most things that are really worth it are that way. So I really like the Danish whisk because it's easy to scrape down the sides. get everything really well incorporated. So this is really thick dough. I don't know what the hydration percentage is on it. My guess is it's around 50, might be more like 40. I'm gonna scrape down the sides. Okay. I'm gonna bring Helga over to see you, and you can see what she looks like. Now, I know hardcore bread people are absolutely pissed at me right now for being like, you can't do that to your starter, but I find sourdough starters to be incredibly resilient. The other option would be to remove some of your starter and find some sourdough discard recipes that use starved starter, meaning you haven't fed them yet. So they're going to be kind of dormant, and those actually do work really well because when you add them into a recipe and sort of feed the starter in the recipe and then let it sit for 12, 24 hours, it reactivates it. So it kind of does the same thing that we're doing here. So as you can see, this doesn't have the ring on it. So a little bit of air can get out, but we don't really want anything to get in. So before I cap her up, I'm going to show you what she looks like. There she is in all of her glory. And I'm going to let this sit on the counter, cap her up, let it sit on the counter. Usually you do it overnight, so the day before you make bread, you just take it out, feed it, leave it on the counter. It'll be lovely and bubbly in the morning. I'm going to make bread this evening. Sounds weird, but I have a system. It's nice and warm today, so I'm going to leave it on the counter. It's just going to bubble and get nice height to it, and I will show you what it looks like. I didn't say this was going to happen. Helga has been out on the counter for, let's see, it's about 4:30. Started her at 11 this morning, 11:30. So not that long. Look at the growth. If I left it like this, it would just go all over the counter. And really you should leave your starter for like 12 hours or so. Oh, there's a bubble. But I really need to make bread now. I tend to make bread around this time of day because of the recipe I use. It's also convenient for me. We're going to be listening to Peppa Pig in the background because I was watching that. The twins are napping. Matt is outside cutting a tree because that's what he does. So I'm going to make bread. I am using Patrick Ryan's sourdough recipe, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit. I have done this from the beginning pretty much because I couldn't get my hands on white bread flour. So in here, I have whole bread flour from a local granary. They grind it there. It's called Ground Up Grains, and it's in Hadley, Massachusetts, which is amazing. So the wheat is not only raised locally, but it's ground just a few miles away. I have white all-purpose flour, which I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but I tried it last time and it worked totally fine. I think it comes down to how much kneading you're willing to do. And I'm going to have to knead a lot because I'm going to make 2 different loaves for you, which sucks for me because it's twice the amount of work, but I want you to see what I do. So I'm going to make 2 loaves. I'm going to make one with all white flour, just all-purpose white flour. And then I'm going to make one that's half white flour to help get the rise out of it and keep it light. Yeah, you can help me. Okay. And then this is whole wheat flour and rye. I really don't have exact measurements for it. I just know half of it is white flour and then the other half is going to be made up of a combination of the 2 of them. I'm really not fussy about it. Again, sourdough is pretty forgiving. So I'm going to walk you through it, but you can find, yes, absolutely. You can find his recipe online. I Love Cooking Ireland, Patrick Ryan's Sourdough Master Class. Okay, so to start, I am going to make an all white loaf, and I do this with all-purpose flour. I don't use bread flour because I don't have it. It's very hard to find right now, but I can get all-purpose flour from Trader Joe's. It's just easy to do. It just means I have to do a lot of kneading. So you can find this recipe on I Love Cooking Ireland's site. It's Patrick Ryan's Sourdough Master Class. I watched it several times through to really get my technique down, and I'm gonna show you how I found the best way to bake it is. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm gonna bring Helga a little closer. It is bubbling like mad. It's super active, so I'm really okay using it even though it hasn't been out for a really long time. So the most important thing that you need here is a scale. You can do this by volume measurement, but it's really gonna come out a lot better if you can be more precise. So I'm just gonna tare it with the bowl. I need 400 grams of flour. So again, this is just white all-purpose flour. And what I do to make my life easier is I tare it every time I add an ingredient. So I'm not doing the math in my head, although I've had to do that before. 400? Okay. Changed its mind. 400 grams. Now, a lot of people argue that to make the best bread, you need really good water. We have really hard water, so sometimes I use the filtered water from the refrigerator, or I'll even use it leftover from the kettle just so it's tepid. But I'm just using it straight out of the sink today. It's good water, has a lot of magnesium in it. It tastes good, it just is kind of hard. I need 230 milliliters of water. Now, grams, milliliters, they're really the same in terms of weight, but I can change the units on here. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna tare it, and 230. This you've gotta be super slow with because it's gonna come out way faster and you're gonna end up with too much water, and that's really hard to change. So I'm at about 180, 230. 23, 30. I'm gonna tare it again, switch back to grams, and I need 5 grams of salt. You can use sea salt. This is just kosher salt. 5. And 160 grams of our starter, which I'm gonna try to, oops, I forgot to tare it. I'm gonna have to clean the crap out of this thing. 160. Come on, Helga. That was 180. So I'm gonna just take a little bit out with my hand. You're gonna have to get in there and get down and dirty anyway. Making bread is an incredibly messy business. Ooh, I need some more. I have clean hands also, that's very important. Okay, so to start, I am going to make an all white loaf, and I do this with all-purpose flour. I don't use bread flour because I don't have it. It's very hard to find right now. But I can get all-purpose flour from Trader Joe's. It's just easy to do. It just means I have to do a lot of kneading. So you can find this recipe on I Love Cooking Ireland's site. It's Patrick Ryan's Sourdough Master Class. I watched it several times through to really get my technique down, and I'm gonna show you how I found the best way to bake it is. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm gonna bring Helga a little closer. It is bubbling like mad. It's super active, so I'm really okay using it even though it hasn't been out for a really long time. So the most important thing that you need here is a scale. You can do this by volume measurement, but it's really gonna come out a lot better if you can be more precise. So I'm just gonna tare it with the bowl. I need 400 grams of flour. So again, this is just white all-purpose flour. And what I do to make my life easier, is I tare it every time I add an ingredient. So I'm not doing the math in my head, although I've had to do that before. 400? Okay. Changed its mind. 400 grams. Now, a lot of people argue that to make the best bread, you need really good water. We have really hard water, so sometimes I use the filtered water from the refrigerator, or I'll even use it leftover from the kettle just so it's tepid. But I'm just using it straight out of the sink today. It's good water, has a lot of magnesium in it. It tastes good, it just is kind of hard. I need 230 milliliters of water. Now, grams, milliliters, they're really the same in terms of weight, but I can change the units on here. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna tare it, and 230. This you've gotta be super slow with because it's gonna come out way faster and you're gonna end up with too much water, and that's really hard to change. So I'm at about 180, 230. 23, 30. I'm gonna tare it again, switch back to grams, and I need 5 grams of salt. You can use sea salt. This is just kosher salt. 5. And 160 grams of our starter, which I'm gonna try to, oops, I forgot to tare it. I'm gonna have to clean the crap out of this thing. 160. Come on, Helga. That was 180. So I'm gonna just take a little bit out with my hand. You're gonna have to get in there and get down and dirty anyway. Making bread is an incredibly messy business. Ooh. Okay, so I have all of my ingredients in the bowl. I'm gonna take my ring off because this gets really messy really easily. Now, one of the things that he stresses in his video, Patrick Ryan, is that you really don't want to add a lot more flour, because the more flour you add, the heavier and denser your bread is. So it's going to be super sticky. Don't be discouraged. Just stick with it. You just got to knead the crap out of it. So I'm going to just lightly flour a surface. And I'm going to just get in there and get dirty. One of the really interesting things about sourdough, if you want to get really geeky about it, and I know I do, is that even if you have the same starter as somebody else, the yeast is going to be pulled from your environment, from your skin. You have yeast on your skin, from the air. There's wild yeast spores in the air, especially outside. I learned this in our distilling class. We took it with somebody who was a brewer in brewing college, which I didn't know that was a thing. And he was talking about wild fermented beer and how they literally just leave it out open in the wild. And whatever yeast is just naturally occurring in the air is going to get into the beer, and it's going to make it really unique. So when I started this, I had a lot of powdered starter that I didn't need. So I shared it with friends, and they all have the same starter, but their sourdough is going to taste different than mine because they have different yeast bacteria in the air. So I want my dough to come together. And now I'm just going to move it over here so you can see it. I am just going to knead it like mad. You'd think that I would have the biggest forearms in the world, and they are starting to get a little ridiculous. Between that and carrying 2 babies around all the time, you'd think I'd have really, really strong arms. So you've got to just keep kneading this. As you can see, it's still a little bit sticky. I have some dough stuck to my hands. Not a big deal. we're gonna work this for a while, and it's not about the time, it's about the consistency of it. The texture is gonna change and become much more silky, and we're gonna do the window pane test on it. It's something that I learned watching that masterclass video, and it really makes a lot of sense to me. Usually it takes me anywhere from 10 to 12 minutes. Sometimes I go 15 just to be safe. And I already did a workout today, so I'm gonna be really sore tomorrow. So I'm just gonna keep kneading this. I push it and then kind of pull it back. I have a hard time doing it the way he suggested it, where you use the heel of your hand and push out and then you wrap your hand and pull it back, because then it all sticks to me. So I just find this works really well for me. Just, you know, pull your core in and just go for it. Get really angry or zenned out or whatever you need to do. Hydrate and just knead your dough. Okay, so I've been kneading for about 10 minutes or so, a little bit longer, and I think it's ready. So to test it, I'm just gonna put a little oil on my hands and stretch it and see if I can see the light through it. It did tear a little bit, but I think this is ready. It feels very different. It feels nice and soft and smooth. So I'm gonna stick this back in the bowl. I'm not gonna worry about putting flour in there or anything. I'm gonna put plastic wrap over the top, and I'm gonna let this sit on the counter for about 3, maybe 4 hours, depending on what time I feel like going to bed. And I'll come back and form this into a loaf, and then I'll put it in my proofing basket. So in the meantime, I'm gonna make my second loaf. And this is the one I've been making for a couple weeks now. So this is a blend of all-purpose, bread flour, and rye. I think it just has more depth and texture to it. So it's the same amount of flour, which is 400 grams, but this time I'm gonna do half white flour and then a mix of all the others. And I'm sure you could do this with honestly anything. I just really like this combination. I've done it with 100% of bolted bread flour from Ground Up Grade, and it's good. It's just, you're not gonna get the rise if you're missing that white flour. So I'm gonna do just 200 grams of white flour. It really doesn't matter if it's right on, like I've got 191 in there and I'm just gonna leave it like that. It's the total weight. So however you want that to make up, if you want a little more rye or a little more wheat, just know that the more white flour you have, the more rise you're gonna get, and the less white flour you use, obviously the less rise you're gonna get. It also means you're gonna have to knead the crap out of it. So I've got 191. I'm gonna get myself to, because I'm running low on rye, which is a travesty. I've got about 250. Or I'm getting to 250, so 60 grams of rye, and then the rest is going to be made up with this beautiful grain. So I'm going to do the rest of it the same way. I'm just going to knead it a little bit longer to get that really good consistency out of it. This one's closer to 15 minutes than 10. For me, personally, if you're super strong, it may take you a lot less. So this has sort of become the weekly ritual. Everyone's asleep, except for Matt. We just got the twins to bed though, because the power went out and their noise machine went off. Anyway, this is what I do. I wait until everyone has gone to sleep, and I just get my dough ready for the next morning to bake. So I'm gonna start with my white loaf first. I'm gonna show you what it looks like. So it's nice and risen, super sticky and soft. So I'm going to use my dough scraper. So I'm going to use my plastic dough scraper. Get a little bit of flour on my hands. Now all I'm doing is knocking it back. And all that means is you're knocking the air out. I have a lightly floured surface, not too much. We still have some candles going because our power went up. Luckily, it was restored very quickly. Now, this roasts very quickly because it's very warm in here right now from the storm that blew in, which is very unusual. Although when we have the wood stove going, it tends to get pretty warm. So I'm just pressing it out. It's so soft. And I'm getting the air bubbles out, and I'm pressing it out into a relative rectangle. And this is a trick I learned from the New York Times no knead bread recipe. So you want to take it and just fold the corners in, folds it in, and roll it into a relative ball. Now this is Patrick Ryan's trick. You're going to take it, take the ends of your hands, and roll the dough forward. Every time you do that, you're pulling it into a tighter ball. Turn it and drag it again. Now you might get a little resistance on your surface, but as you're doing this, you're pulling the seams in and just pulling this into a nice tight ball of dough. All right. Now, I have two very well floured proofing baskets, and you don't need a proofing basket. You can use just a bowl with a tea towel, quite a bit of flour in it. You can also, if you have trouble with your dough sticking, you can use parchment paper. So now that I have this beautiful ball of dough, I am going to put it seam side up. So this nice round side. What that does is it's going to take on the shape of this basket. This is a very large proofing basket and kind of a small loaf of dough, although the white loaf is going to rise much more than the wheat one. So it's just kind of containing it. I also often use oat bran to kind of give it a little more oomph and to give it a little more protection from the corners of the bowl. So I'm going to use whatever you have, wheat germ, wheat bran on this. And I'm just gonna lightly sprinkle it on there. Just helps give it another layer of protection. Take a clean tea towel, cloth, and I'm gonna put this in the fridge overnight. That's really important. What that does is actually makes the sourdough digest the gluten very slowly, digest the sugars and the available sugars in there slowly. Actually makes it better for your gut overall. It's just better for you in general, and it's better for the sourdough. It's gonna proof very slowly that way. It's also gonna develop more flavor that way. Now, last week we sort of accidentally performed an experiment on this. I had Matt form up the loaves because I wanted to go to bed and I didn't want to wait up until 10 o'clock at night to do this. So I said, hey, form up the loaves, put them in the proofing basket and stick them in the fridge. And I had a feeling he didn't hear me when I said stick them in the fridge. He didn't. I came out the next morning to a very overproofed loaf of dough and I thought, oh dear, I ruined it. But because it's sourdough and it's forgiving, I knocked it back, reformed it, and stuck it out on the counter for another 2 to 3 hours. Stuck it in the oven and it was beautiful. It came out so nicely. So it absolutely can be saved. Like I said, sourdough is incredibly forgiving. You gotta play with it though. You have to see what works best for you. Now I'm gonna form up my whole wheat loaf. So as you can see, it didn't rise quite as much, but it's still really good. It has a very weedy smell to it. And I like that. I like my bread to be chewy and flavorful and have lots of texture and depth to it. So we're gonna form this one the exact same way. The only difference, like I said, is you're just not gonna get the same amount of rise, although this is pretty damn close. So I'm gonna fold all of my corners in, fold them in, tuck them in, flip it over, hands. I probably actually have too much flour on the surface. Usually the first few times you do this, it will stick to the surface, and then you're dragging it to tighten it. There we go. And every single loaf of bread behaves a little bit differently. Every recipe, every combination of flour, it's just gonna behave a little differently, and it's this fun experiment. Sometimes it's a disaster. I've had loaves that completely overproofed, that I've nearly cried over, and they were basically like a really hard focaccia. That only happened one time, but still. See, now that I've got a little more sticking going on the counter, I'm able to drag it into a ball much better. And I'm just turning it about 45 degrees and then dragging and tucking it under. So again, I have a proofing basket. I'm just gonna flip it seam side up, put a little flour and a little oat bran, just to help keep it from sticking. Stick it in the fridge overnight. Now that our power is back on, and I will see this. So here we are the next morning, and the bread has been proofing overnight, and I am going to walk you through how to bake it. I have an oven heated at 450 degrees, and this is very important, with a cast iron pizza stone in there. And that's what I bake my bread on. It gives me a nice, crusty outside. The really important thing we're also gonna add in here is hot water. I'm just gonna pour this in the bottom of the oven. I don't know the exact ratio of steam per amount of time you need to bake a loaf of bread. I'll add it in here. But I know that you need a real big blast of steam in the beginning to get the bread to rise the rest of the way. So I'm gonna start with our white loaf, and I'm just gonna add some flour and some oat bran to keep it from sticking to the peel. And I'm just gonna take my loaf, pop it out. It has a lot of flour on the outside, so you can kind of get some off. And I am going to score the top of this. It's good if you can do this with a scoring knife. I don't have one, so I'm just gonna use a paring knife. And as you can see, it didn't rise a ton because it was in the fridge. And I'm just gonna cut through really pretty deep, and you're just allowing the steam to escape from the top. So I'm gonna add this into the oven. And I'm gonna put this hot water in the bottom of the oven. Be really careful, you don't burn yourself. Steam burns are the worst. Now I'm gonna bake this at 450 degrees for 30 minutes. That is just what's worked. I've tried all different kinds of things. I've tried all different temperatures, different times. I've tried doing it in the Dutch oven. This is by far yields the best bread for me. This is what works in my ovens, so. Okay, so I have like a minute left on my white bread loaf. And I've taken my whole wheat loaf out of the fridge, and it got a little fancy with the scoring. Who knows what the heck it's gonna look like when it comes out. It never seems to grow where I proof it, or where I score it, but that's fine. So the other thing I wanted to point out is that it's really important to cool your bread before you cut it. I know it's tempting. I usually cut into it when it's like still warm but not hot. But you really want to make sure you're cooling it on a wire rack, or this trivet has become my favorite thing to cool it on. It has holes in it. You want to let any of the extra steam inside the bread come out so that your crust is nice and crispy and then the inside stays nice and soft. And I'm going to take this loaf out. Woo, steaming glasses. There it is. Just to check it. Should make a nice hollow sound when you tap the bottom. So, I'm gonna pop this loaf in and I'm gonna try to do a time lapse. You need to make sure you get the steam in the bottom of the oven.